Okay.
So yeah, I'm going to be talking about strengths because it's a big passion area of mine, and specifically from the perspective of how we use our strengths, so our unique talents, to navigate challenging environments, challenging situations, as well as in the good times as well. Because I think, in the chaotic world that we live in, it's a really important lens for us to look at. So yeah, I'll be talking a bit about my journey with strengths and why it is I'm so passionate about them. Um, what I mean by strengths and some of the definitions and ways of thinking about strengths in a slightly different way than perhaps you thought of before. And then think about how strengths maybe show up in different environments, in different situations, so we can get used to being able to recognize them. And then finally think about how we can leverage them to navigate, like I say, challenges and build resilience, because this is a kind of a big part of the conversation I want to angle towards here. And then we'll go into breakouts where you'll get the opportunity to think about, your strengths and how they might be showing up, and what you might want to do with those going forward. But please do put any questions in the chat as we go through. If you have anything or anything resonates, let me know. It'd be lovely to know if anything in particular stands out to you, or you want anything clarified further. But to start with my journey with strengths, so strengths really for me have been the thing that helped me discover who I am at my core and what my unique power is. And I love the word power now. I think when I was, younger in my career, that kind of scared me a little bit, but now I can confidently say strengths have made me feel powerful. They have helped me redefine what it is to be a leader. Within my previous jobs, but also as a leader in the broader sense of my career and with friends and family. They helped me articulate what my best self looks like, which I think is quite hard to do as women. We're kind of naturally inclined not to kind of celebrate ourselves and kind of almost play it down a little bit. But I think strengths have really given me language to talk about myself in a very positive, affirming way that has made a big difference to my career. But they've also, on the other side, helped me recognize when I've been in burnout, for example, or I've had some really challenging times, and they've helped me understand how to get myself out of that cycle. So that's why I talk about strengths being a compass, is because they really are something that I keep coming back to time and time again to help me make decisions and navigate the world around me. But I think to share a story that I often share when I talk about this, and especially when I'm working with, clients, for example, is when I was earlier in my career. So I was doing quite well in my career. I was sort of progressing at, a normal rate, I would say, but then I quickly stagnated because basically I wanted to move into more senior sort of leadership type positions, and all the people that I saw ahead of me were more of the traditional, I'm going to say masculine type of leadership, more assertive, more confident, decisive, loud, all things that I wasn't at all. And I really kind of became very self-conscious of like, that's not who I can be, want to be. And I even got that feedback as well, right? People said, if you want to progress, you need to be this type of way. And it just felt really, really inauthentic to me. And a colleague at the time introduced me to this strengths profile, which I'll talk to you a little bit more about in a bit. And it really was the catalyst of change for me. I think some of the strengths that I saw reflected back at me from when I got this report, strengths that I was, things that I was good at but underutilizing, represented to me the type of leader that I wanted to be and could be as well. I realized that I had this quiet power that was actually a really kind of strong leadership capability. So things like connection, curiosity, courage, judgment, all of these things felt like me. It felt as, I saw myself reflected back, but a version of me that I hadn't quite explored yet. So that was a huge kind of game changer for me. And I think this helped me define, like I said, what I wanted to be as a leader. And it ultimately led to me discovering positions and roles that allowed me to be my best self. And like I said earlier, like I truly felt powerful in some of these roles. I really found my footing with it. And it was all because of that exploration of strengths that I'd had. But I've had dips over the years. I've experienced burnout several times. I've experienced some tough challenges. And strengths has enabled me to kind of put an analytical lens on it and say, actually, it's because I wasn't using my strengths in the right way, or I was ignoring some of my key strengths, or I was leaning too far into things that actually weren't my strengths and were draining my energy. And that perhaps is what led to the burnout. And then there's also kind of helped me then think, right, well, if I want to get out of this situation, kind of recover from this burnout, how do I lean into those strengths that I know serve me well to raise my energy again, make me more motivated, and kind of find more joy in what I'm doing? So ultimately, what I'm able to do now is rather than ask myself the question, what is the right choice? I can ask myself, what choice aligns best with who I am? And that has been, a big kind of, turning point in my own journey. So I just wanted to share that to sort of ground the session. And that then ultimately led to my coaching approach. So I've always loved people, and I did psychology at university. I've been in talent development, as Tarana said, for most of my career. I've always, no stretch that I wanted to get into coaching, but what I realised actually quite quickly was that what I'd done with my own journey and the place I'd gotten to, I've created a career that I'm really proud of and feels aligned to who I am. I took a process. There is a framework behind it that I can replicate and take other people through. It's not some abstract thing that I can't explain to anybody else. So I'm really passionate about supporting women in particular, and especially those who are younger in their career. I think I have a real thing about, especially in the corporate world, you get to a certain level, say executive or director level, and you just get handed a coach because it's like, oh, you've suddenly got all this responsibility. Hey, here's a coach to deal with it. But I'm very much of the opinion of, if we supported women earlier in their journeys, help them discover what it is they're really good at, help them build that confidence, by the time they do get to senior leadership positions, they're really amazing at it. They're just mastering their craft rather than starting from scratch. So that's my kind of big thing. I'm really driven by this mantra you can see on the slides there, which is your career should fit you, not the other way around. And as a group of entrepreneurs, I'm sure that resonates with quite a lot of you. But the approach I sort of take is starting with the discovery. So it's one thing to discover your strengths. You maybe have an idea of some things you're good at. You maybe have been told by others certain strengths they see in you, but it's a whole other thing to create your own meaning from them and make sure they really resonate with you. And this is something I find takes a bit of time when I'm working with clients. And especially, like I say, it's kind of a unique problem. I don't know if there's a right way to put it, but with women, it's quite hard for us to really, like say, take ownership of that and say, yeah, you know what, I'm really bloody good at this. So that is something I work with clients on. And then the second part of it is then owning your own narrative. So I think this is about, reclaiming your own story, not doing what you're being told you should be doing or other people are telling you should be doing, but saying this is what I need to be doing because it's aligned to me and it's right for me and it's going to give me the most joy and sort of energy in my life. So something I work on with my clients is creating this strength story, which is something then they can put out into the world, whether that's introducing themselves to other people, going networking, putting it on their LinkedIn, going to job interviews, whatever that looks like. It comes from a place of their core strengths. And I think that's really important. And that for me has been a huge game changer as well. I remember from my interview for my current role that I'm in, one of the bits of feedback I got was that I came across as highly emotional intelligent and very kind of considered and thoughtful in my approach and the way I articulated myself. And I attribute a lot of that to this work on strengths. And then finally, ultimately what this leads to then is being able to be your best self more consistently. So obviously there are going to be things that come up from time to time and are going to throw us off our path. But when you take the strengths approach, you're able to bounce back quicker and therefore build resilience. So this is all about, this kind of showing up as your best self as consistently as possible. So what do we mean by strengths then? So I know there are a lot of different tools and assessments out there, but this is the one that I was first introduced to and the one I've stuck with because I genuinely love it. I know that there's going to be personal preference in here, of course, but it's the strengths profile from Capfinity, and I will share a link to the free profile if you're interested in the chat afterwards. But ultimately, strengths are things that we are good at, that we enjoy doing, and that give us energy. And energy is the core component and why I love this one more so than some of the others, because I think that's when we talk about, navigating challenging times and resilience is being able to protect our own energy. So I love the link between skills that you're good at and energy here in this definition of strengths. What I love about this one, opposed to, I've done I mean, I'm a sucker for any sort of assessment or personality types quiz. I love them all. But I think so Myers-Briggs, for example, told me was that I was someone very different inside of work and out. And I didn't like that. I think where strengths profile feels different to me is that it's, like I say, core to who I am. It's how I show up in different environments, but still being true to me. So that's why I kind of prefer this to some of the others. But you might think about strengths as well as skills that are things that you perform easily or you find quicker to hone and kind of master. But I love how they categorize different types of strengths. And again, I haven't really seen this done in other profiles. There might be some out there, but what I love is that once you've done this assessment, you get this report which tells you what your realized strengths are. So these are things that you do well, give you energy, and that you're using quite often. So there might be things that you're doing more subconsciously because you are doing them so often. But these are things that you perhaps can overutilize sometimes. So there's always a bit of a watch out here for sometimes we can overuse strengths. So empathy is one of mine. I can definitely overuse that one. It become a bit of a emotional burden sometimes. So that's one I just have to be mindful of. It's definitely a strength, but you have to kind of watch out for some of those things. And then unrealized strengths are things that you do well and that energize you, but you're perhaps under potentializing. So when I referenced earlier my story of, my journey with strengths and kind of seeing that leadership potential, all of those strengths were listed in my unrealized strengths. They were a version of me, as I said, that I hadn't yet explored and appreciated, but that felt like me. So often it's the unrealized strengths that are the kind of bits you want to focus on. And then you've got learned behaviors, which is always really interesting. These are things that you do perform well, but actually don't energize you. So they're often, the types of soft skills that you've had to learn to be good at because of your job or your environment that you're operating in, but actually drain your energy. So you have to try and use those very sparingly and in the right contexts. And then same thing with weaknesses in a way. These are things that you just really should avoid doing if you can, or use very, very little. So these really are going to drain your energy. And often when I think about, some of my causes or leads to burnout, it's been because I've spent too much time in the learnt behavior space and the weaknesses. I've been using those skills too much and not enough of the realized and unrealized strengths. And I think, the kind of ethos with this, if you like, is to almost say, forget your weaknesses. There's no point focusing on that, which I know traditionally has always been the thing that we're told to look at when our personal development, plans is what are we not good at that we need to get better at? That's not the way you look at it from this angle. You kind of say, right, I need to focus on my strengths, realized and unrealized. That's what I'm going to create development plans off. And in some cases, it's a way of saying, I can't ignore this weakness, but I can reframe it and I can lean into strengths which are going to make this so much easier to deal with. So it really is a kind of a useful, kind of an interesting way to look at those different aspects of your life and things that, like I say, are your unique talents and things that you do best at. What I've included here as well is obviously you can take the test, and I definitely encourage you to do that assessment. It's a really good one. But because we're going to be talking about this in the breakouts later, I just wanted to give you some ideas of ways you can discover your strengths and things you can, questions you can ask yourself. So these are things like, what do your friends and family know you for? So often what I find is easier to put ourselves in other people's shoes, if you like, and say, well, if I was my friend, I would probably say this about me. I don't know exactly why we're wired that way, but it just feels a little bit easier. I think I always know that it's easier to tell somebody else what you think their strengths are than look inward and do it for yourself. So sometimes it's just easier, like I say, to kind of put yourself in the other person's shoes. But it's also good to think about, when are you at your best? What do you enjoy doing most? What does a great day look like to you? Because these are all things that will start to give you indications of actually, oh, I really enjoy doing this. It might be because that's a strength of mine. When did you last feel truly energized? So you might have heard of the term of like being in the flow. So when that's kind of when you're doing a task or activity that everything feels effortless and easy. That again can give you a real strong indication of your strengths. Again, what tasks or activities do you find easy? What skills have you perhaps learned more quickly than others? And these are soft skills rather than hard skills. And lastly, when did you last achieve something that you were truly proud of? And what is it that made you feel so proud of that achievement? So, as I said, these are things to sort of start pondering on, as we'll come back to some of these in a breakout a bit later. Um, these things that I do with my clients as well. I get them to do the tests, but I also get them to do a variety of different activities and exercises, including going and then asking other people for feedback as well, which I would recommend. Just to give a real holistic view of your strengths, because like I say, it can take time to really appreciate and understand the meaning behind them for you and you only. So do take that time in kind of understanding and appreciating them, and just start noticing as well, as you go about your day and your week and your month, start trying to notice when these things are happening, so that will kind of help you recognize and appreciate them in a different way. So then how does strengths show up in different environments? So strengths can obviously show up in, like I say, when you're in your flow state, when you have achieved something, but it can also be when you are in survival mode. So this ties back to the resilience piece. Your realized strengths, for example, might go into overdrive. So as I mentioned earlier, empathy is one of my strengths, but when I'm in survival mode, I'm in burnout and I'm kind of really kind of struggling, that becomes emotional overload. I kind of lean into that more than I should have, perhaps. And then other strengths can go quiet. So connection is another one of my strengths, that actually when I am in burnout, I tend to withdraw, I underperform, I withdraw away from everything. So rather than connecting with people that give me energy, I don't connect with anybody, and I sort of withdraw from all social interactions, thinking that I'm protecting myself, but actually I'm draining my energy by doing that. You can also misinterpret your strengths as weaknesses as well. So you can start to doubt yourself and say, well, actually, is this something I'm really good at? Is this something that I should be kind of focusing on? Am I being too loud, out about it? Like, you can really start to question, I think. And then also your strengths become a lot harder to access as well. Everything just feels like effort. And again, that's why it's kind of tempting to withdraw from things, rather than look at it with that analytical lens and say, actually, I know this feels like, making that connection with somebody or going and seeing this person feels like a big thing to do, but actually I know it's the thing that's going to give me energy and perhaps bring me out of this spiral. And then in flow state, which we kind of discussed a little bit before as well. So tasks might feel effortless. Time moves differently. So for me, being in a flow state is when I'm gardening. I absolutely love gardening. I can be out there for hours and hours and hours, and I'll come back in and be like, oh, I thought I was only out there for 20 minutes. But I just get into this kind of flow state of, just enjoying being out in my garden and kind of, harvesting veg or whatever it looks like. But also with my coaching my clients as well. I mean, obviously I do have to be a bit mindful of the time, but I do often find it's 20 minutes will go by and I'll be like, oh gosh, that time's gone nowhere. But you also kind of might find yourself when you're in flow state making decisions a lot more quickly, but also with a greater clarity and confidence that you might have experienced before. You're more likely to feel more grounded and capable, and you experience momentum. So you might come out of that. Like, I come out of my coaching sessions going, oh my gosh, like I have so much energy right now. I feel like I need to do something, be productive, because I just feel like I've got that momentum. And then finally, through your achievements. So the strain that you might notice, the more you kind of sit and reflect on your achievements, the more you'll notice that the same strengths tend to show up repeatedly. You'll start to notice patterns in your approach as well, and meaning that you're likely to build more trust in your own capability, and therefore understand what it is that you should repeat in order to keep seeing success. So there's a few different ways you can look at this, and like I say, just give you that greater appreciation from strengths. So then I think this is the final slide or final couple. But this comes back to then this idea of strengths as a compass. So as I said before, like when things get tough, we do default to survival mode a lot of the time. Resilience comes from consciously shifting out of that survival mode back into our strengths. So what I've said here is kind of, again, I think there's a few different equations out there for what resilience means, but this is just looking at it from the strengths perspective. Resilience, the way I look at it, means having an awareness of your strengths, so knowing who you are at your core, plus protecting your energy, which means that you have capacity to show up better, and then reframing challenges so you can move forward with confidence and make decisions from confidence and not fear. So, for example, from me is I often find in my work, I have to be quite persistent, and persistence is one of my top weaknesses that comes up every time I do the report. Um, for me, I guess it's, I know I'm going to have multiple rounds of feedback and sign off and all of this kind of, that's the type of work I do where I have a lot of that different cycles of like has to go here and then here and there and here and here. And if I wasn't careful, that would cause me to burn out pretty quick because that is a huge weakness of mine. But the way I look at it is I lean into my strength of prevention. So I'm very good at looking ahead, anticipating roadblocks, and then coming up with mitigation strategies. So I lean into that. I time block my calendar. I make connections with people that I know can help problem solve with me and help me see the bigger picture and plan those kind of roadblocks ahead of time, and then reframe the outcome to say, actually, rather than me going into that thinking this is going to be a headache because I'm going to have to go through all these different rounds of feedback and approvals, I think, you know what, this is a big project that I'm approaching. I know the outcome's going to be really great. I know that I'm going to have to go and engage with these different people, but you know what, it means I can form new connections. It means that I can be strategic. I can lean into my strengths of prevention to help kind of anticipate things before they even get there. And it suddenly becomes a lot more of a manageable task, if you like, or a manageable kind of situation to be in, which I think is important. So I think that's kind of it from me before we go into breakouts. Obviously, yeah, happy to connect with anybody if you want to just chat further. Like I said, I love talking about strengths. I'm happy to do that more, hours and hours and hours long. But yeah, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, or you can see my Instagram handle there as well. But yeah, I think we're going to move into breakouts now, where I'm just going to get you to think about some, ways that your own strengths show up in different ways. Explore that a little bit, and then hopefully this is the start of a great journey with you and your strengths and kind of your understanding of them. So thank you very much. Hope that was interesting.